afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, this is Redberry Leo here, and welcome back to another Aerospace Dimensions video. In this week's video, we are talking about Module 2, Chapter 2, which talks about airports. Now, in the previous video, I went over Chapter 1, and if you have not checked that out, please take a look at it in the iCard above. And if you have watched it, then get ready for some exciting information about how airports work. There are two different kinds of airports. There's controlled and uncontrolled. What does this mean? It means that there is a tower where there are communications between the airplanes and the tower, or ground, because there's ground and tower, because tower does the stuff in the air and the ground is people on the ground. And an airport can be anything. There are some private fields out there that are like a small, long grass field that's like only big enough for a tiny single-engine Cherokee or Piper plane, but there are also really huge ones. So if you're familiar with BWI, which is in Baltimore, or Dulles International Airport, or LAX, all of those different airports, the bigger ones, are towered, and typically the pilots talk with air traffic controller, ATC, and they coordinate with them as they are flying, and then as they get closer, then they talk to the tower, and then they make a landing. So, I'm going to talk about the process of from the beginning of a flight to the end of a flight, and go into a little bit of detail about that because I myself am a pilot, and it doesn't really go in huge depth, but I also won't be spending a ton of time on it because it's not really covered in the book. So the first step to preparing for a flight is that you have to prepare ahead of time. So there's an acronym called I'm Safe, which is like a mental checklist to make sure that the pilot and the crew are all ready, safe, and healthy to make sure that they will be effective during their flight. So I'm Safe stands for illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, and enough food, water, and general energy. If, for some reason, someone does not address all of these areas, like if some pilot comes to the plane drunk, like they had alcohol within the past 8 hours before flying, and they're still like hungover and they're not feeling great, or if someone's sick from a cold, or if they have allergies and they're really congested and they feel it in their face or in their ears, anything like that could result in further mishaps, and we want to prevent those kind of things. So by doing the I'm Safe checklist, we as an air crew can make sure that we're all ready to go and we're safe to fly. So after checking your personal self, you also need to check the weather. So there are a few different pieces of information within weather that you would need to check before you fly, such as how low the cloud deck is, like how low the ceiling is, if it's 500 feet above the ground level, or if it's like 6,000 feet. Depending on what your training is, you may not be able to fly, but if you have more training, like if you have an instrument flight rating, you might be able to fly through the clouds, and it's lower ceiling requirements than if you're trying to fly with visual flight rules or VFR flight conditions. Once you have determined that you personally are safe and that the weather conditions are ready, you would then do a pre-flight of the plane, where the plane is just sitting outside, and then you check by walking around and looking at all of the systems. I typically start at the static port because I just start there on the pilot's side, and then I do my walk around along the wing, behind the wing, checking the ailerons and the flaps, and then moving my way back, checking the elevator, the rudder, and like all the nuts and bolts to make sure everything will be there, looking at the counterweights. If you haven't done a walk around a plane before, no worries, but if you do an orientation ride, take a look at what the pilot is doing and pay close attention to it. If you have questions for your pilot, then feel free to ask them. They'd probably be more than happy to explain what they're doing, and it's a great learning opportunity for you. So I hope you get to do an orientation ride if you have not already. So after doing our walk around the plane, then we would start the engine up, make sure it's all clear, that we're not going to hit anyone, and nothing's in the way. We'll say clear prop, and we'll crank the engine on with our fuel full, or our mixture completely rich. And after starting it up, we would probably check the brakes. We would go onto the radio, check the weather, because there is a weather report every hour from the different airports if it's towered, and that is called the METAR, which is the meteorological forecast for the airport's location. And it's actually read off by a person at the one that I've been going to, but sometimes it's automated, and that's a different system, and it's not updated as frequently. So we are starting to taxi forward, but before we do anything, we need to talk to ground. So we would tell ground, we would call ground, we'd say, like, if you're doing a specific location, so let's say we're at Dulles, we would say, like, Dulles ground, and then we would say our call sign, so who we're talking to, who we are, where we are located, like east ramp with information, and then the information that we received from that weather report, the METAR, which maybe, let's say it's alpha, so we would say Dulles ground, Cessna 1234, with information, India on the east ramp, ready to taxi, flight plan to the west. Something like that. And then, since you filed a flight plan, then you would communicate with tower, and they would say, okay, so you're going to taxi Bravo, and then take that taxiway all the way to runway 24. And then you would repeat back, and then you're cleared to taxi, and you would go on your adventure for flying. Since we are in the Runup area now after taxiing, we need to stop, make sure that our engine is good to go, and ensure all of the engine systems are checked. Our instruments are, there's like a 6-pack of instruments that we talked about last time. We would check over each of those to make sure they're set. Set the heading indicator to what the compass up here says, and then we would talk to tower after completing our run-up. Once we were cleared by tower, we would get on to the runway, and then we would take off. If there is a problem when you're taking off, it depends on what altitude you are at to determine whether you should come back and try to land on the runway and like tell tower what's going on, or if you would have to like land in a field nearby. So if you are a pilot, then typically before you take off, it's best to check and see if there are fields, just so you know if there's a safe place to land. Sometimes people have had to resort to landing on a road, and some argue that you should land on a road, but there's also chances that people might be driving on said road when you are trying to do that emergency landing. So it's up to the pilot's discretion, but they need to pick a runway of where they're going to land if there is an emergency, and then follow the proper procedures, like pitch their airplane to a certain airspeed and make sure that they are controlling their flaps as needed. After taking off, sometimes towers have pilots join a little flight pattern first before they leave the pattern, or if you're a student pilot, you almost exclusively do a flight pattern to begin with to understand how to take off and land. You don't exclusively do it per se, but you typically do some work flying in like a practice area, so you might do steep turns or power on, power off stalls, and then when you are in the pattern, then you'd practice doing the radio calls with the tower and communicating with the traffic around you. And in addition to that, just knowing what each leg means and what adjustments you have to make to the aircraft in order to land safely and then take off safely again. So there is a diagram in the Aerospace Dimensions book, and I will also include a diagram up here, which shows what an air traffic pattern looks like. And there are a few different legs, and each part of that box is a leg. When you are taking off, it's typically called a departure, and it's in the upwind direction, which means the wind is going in the opposite direction of the way that the plane is flying. And then the next leg is called crosswind, because you are going across the wind, and then you're going downwind, which means the wind is pushing on the tail of the plane, and then there's base, and then final, and you're landing. So on a runway, there are 3 major markings that you can see from the air, and it's typically the center line, which is the dotted white lines in the middle of the runway, and then there are also 2 numbers on opposite sides. When your plane is flying towards a runway, you'll see a number, so it might be, like in the instance of the module, it says 11 or 29. And these are the opposite compass headings. So if we are going towards the 11, that means our compass should say 11 on it, and that's our heading. So if we were going the opposite direction, that means our compass would say 29 on it, or also our heading indicator would say 29 as we are coming in for a landing. There are sometimes additional markings on runways depending on if it's like a precision instrument runway or if it's just a grass runway. If there's a grass runway, you probably don't even have lines to begin with. It's just a grass field. And hope that it is mowed nicely and that it's not muddy, because then you could have a prop strike if your front landing gear gets stuck in the mud, which would be terrible, and your engine would be destroyed, and no boy. But most times, I recommend just going on the normal runway that is paved, because that's a lot safer, and if you're a student pilot learning, just do that, please. That's a lot easier, and you don't have to be as careful. But there are certain procedures that you have to take if you're doing a short runway or a long runway, and sometimes you'd have to add extra flaps, or sometimes you would have to apply your brakes at the beginning, add full power, hold those brakes until you got the engine all ramped up, and then let go, and you're like, whee! But it depends on what situation you are in. And of course, if you are learning how to fly, then you would talk about it with your instructor and make sure that you are following the POH that is associated with the aircraft that you are learning in, because it does say the calculations that you should put together if it's a short runway or long runway. And that's also part of the preparations before you fly. You should know where you are going and kind of have a general idea of how long the runway is, what the runway numbers are, like if you're going down 11 or 29, like the wind direction, and all that kind of information. But you don't need to know this for the test per se. I'm just including this in case people are planning on being pilots and they just want like a little precursor. So here is a list of the different runway signs. I am not going to go into detail on them though. And the reason being is because it's easier if you just take a look at what they look like and then see what they have to say. Like, I was talking about taxiways, that's typically a letter, and you would call it like Bravo, Echo, Foxtrot, etc. with like the alphabet. And runways are numbers, just so people don't get confused. There's like a double line on the ground, or a double line with like little hash marks, or little like dotted lines next to it, and that means you can either enter it from one side and can't enter it without clearance from another. But I highly recommend just looking into that yourself, since I am not going into that today, because there are a bunch of them, and I want to make sure that you get a chance to look at them in detail on your own. If you do have questions about any of them, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I'm going to give you a quick reminder that I always appreciate subscriptions, likes, and comments. The more you interact with the channel, if you ring the notification bell, anything like that, YouTube's like, we like this. And we've been getting more subscribers day by day, and I absolutely love it. I'm so glad we have more people joining us. And I would love to have more people in our community of awesome. So, if you have not already, I highly suggest you like, comment, and subscribe. Now let's get back into the video. So I'm going to go over a few different lights. I am not going over all of them. I'm going over just a handful, and the book does go into a little bit more detail, but I just want to do a general overview. On runways that have lights, there are a set of green lights at the end that is being used for landing, and then red on the end that is being used for taking off. If you are coming from a certain direction, you will see the green lights on one end and red lights on the other, and if you're coming from the other direction, it'll be green lights and then red lights. These lights, they're like half and half, so you can see the red lights and the green lights, and just make sure you understand which runway you are landing on before you start going and landing, so you don't run into other people who are in the pattern. People who are on final, like they're about to land, take priority over those who are about to join the pattern or those who want to take off. So there are a few rules with how you're courteous to other pilots and who gets priority. Not going into that this video, but it's just something to keep in mind when you might be flying. Also, on the sides of the runway, they have white lights, and there's something called a VASI system. Well, it's the Visual Approach Slope Indicator, and it's a set of 4 lights, and they can either be red or white, depending on if it's like 50-50 or if it's all red or all white, determines if you are actually on the glide slope to come in and land on the runway safely. If you're red, if all 4 are red, red means dead. It means you're too low and that you need to add a little bit more power to increase your altitude and then be able to make it safely onto the runway. If all 4 are white, that means you're too high. And then if you have a mix of red and white, that means you're about on the glide slope. But if you're 50-50, red and white, then that means you are on the perfect glide slope. Now, there are a few different types of indicators that show wind. And wind is important. Why? If you think back to when I was talking about the pattern, I said upwind, downwind, crosswind. It's based off of the direction of the wind. So if we think of our example with runway 11 and runway 29, we would want to make sure that we are taking off in the direction of the wind. So if our windsock, one of the indicators, has the tail like being blown in this direction, which runway would we use? Would we take 29 or 11? We would want to make sure we're taking 29 because it's in the opposite direction of the wind being blown. And if we go off the runway because of the wind pushing us too far and we don't have enough time to take off, that can be a huge problem. And also at non-towered airports, it's just a common rule that you go in the direction that the wind is against, just so that it's safer for landing. So it helps you also slow down when you're on final. There's also a tetrahedron and a wente, but I have personally never seen them being used. So the most common one is a windsock, and then the direction that the wind is blowing, the wind gets caught in that sock, and then it will be open more, or it will be bigger and like more straight if it's stronger winds. And if it's like droopy, then it's not as strong of winds. And sometimes it might even be calm winds and it's just facing in the direction that it was from stronger winds before. Are you familiar with the phonetic alphabet? The activity 4 in this section talks about it, and it's basically the alphabet that pilots use. So I'll briefly say all of them, and then if you would like to study them, these are also used when you're doing radio communications, and I do plan on doing an iCut video at some point, but I have not yet, so I'll briefly go over the phonetic alphabet. It goes as follows: Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta Echo Foxtrot Golf Hotel India Juliet Kilo Lima Mike November Oscar Papa Romeo Quebec Sierra Tango Uniform Victor Whiskey X-Ray Yankee Zulu, which is a bit of a mouthful, and I know I did it really quickly at the beginning, but these are the alphabet words that we would need to know if we are communicating, like our call sign. So if we are X-Ray Tango Foxtrot 1-2, and that's our call sign, then whenever we are calling ground or tower, we would use the phonetic letters to represent our plane, just so that it's very clear what our call sign is, because if I say B, on the radio it might sound like P. And just to make sure that no one's confused, all of these words are very different from each other, and they are very individually distinctive. So that is what is used for radio communications, and I hope you get a chance to study it and memorize it if you haven't already. So that is everything for today's video, guys. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments or with a like. I always appreciate the support. And if there was anything I did not cover today, please feel free to check it out in the Aerospace Dimensions book. I will be doing the Module 2 Chapter 3 video very shortly, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one. So thank you so much for watching, and that is all, folks. Until next time, toodles.